Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm, of course, Phil Better, the host of this amazing podcast series about talking about creating a podcast and how podcasting can help you grow your business and your brand and all that fun stuff and learn how to do it live with me on the Facebook in the Book of the Face. Give me 2 seconds here. I was running a little behind and I'm trying to find. There we go. There we go. There we go. I have notes for this. Ooh, we got some comments. Love it. Let's go. My boy Aaron, always tuning in, always part of the family. Thank you so much. If you are tuning in live, make sure you leave a comment, #live if you want, or if you're watching the replay, #replay, or if you're listening to this on the podcast, go over to the episode on Instagram and like and leave a comment saying you caught it. I want to hear about all the love that you guys are getting from this series that I am doing. I am exhausted because today was a day of guesting. I was a guest on a lot of podcasts today, some live, some recorded for later release. So you'll be able to see that. I always mention it on my Instagram. So make sure you follow me at Podcaster Phil Better on Instagram so that you guys can see when I'm going live and follow me on my journey of amazingness. But yes, I was a guest on a couple of podcasts. I'm gonna talk about them. One of them was on the You Suck Network, an amazing podcast network and podcast as it is, going the US and UK connection. So that's great. Amazing conversation there, and it was a lot of fun. But I'm going to teach you, because when you're going to be podcasting, you're going to be guesting on other shows. And how do you use that platform of guesting on other shows to bring an audience over to your podcast? So this is very important because that's also one of the ways you grow is by being a guest on other podcasts, but also it helps you learn and you make those connections that can give you better guests or other things. So I have a list of about 7 tips, and I'll maybe throw in a bonus or 2. But it is an upcoming book that I'm writing. Just like hosting is a book that an upcoming book I'm writing. This is also an upcoming book that I'm writing for you guys. Yes, like being a guest on Horror with Sir Sturdy, another free plug. Matt, I give you free plugs every week because he has a great podcast. If you are a podcaster and you're watching this in my podcasting group, Better Podcasting Growth Group, which you can find on Facebook, make sure you join it. You guys can connect with some amazing podcasters and use their audience to grow, because all these podcasters care deeply about growth of podcasting and making the best product out there. So yes, Sir Sturdy getting a lot of love from the Podcast Mogul Phil Better. But here's the thing: when you're guesting on a podcast, the number one thing you want to do is you want to, first of all, you want to listen to their podcast. Listen to a couple episodes, when you're working out, you're on your way to work, or whatever you're doing in your morning, ritual. Listen to at least 3 or 4 episodes so you understand what the podcast is like and how it rolls out. So you're not jumping in blind and going, I don't know what it's like. Because that could be detrimental to you, because you could be going on a podcast that you may not jive with the host, and you don't want that, because that can cause ill will and make a bad episode. So you want to make sure that you're listening to episodes before you get on, so you know what the style of the podcast is, especially if it's going business while, because some business are straight interview based. They have questions and they don't allow for long form discussions like some of them, like Invest in Yourself has that both back and forth. Some of them are very strict and some of them are just a conversation. So you have to look out for that when you're going on. So you also get prepared, and like I said, as a host, it's great when we hear feedback from our guests about how great the podcast is, but also you want to brown nose as well, because then the host is going to like you, so you want to listen to their episodes. Yeah, like Aaron says, I agree, especially for one like mine, little to no filter. Not everyone can handle that. That's right. I was on another podcast that was pretty like zero filter, the You Suck Network podcast. And yeah, you have to be used to it, but also that can allow you to like relax a little. But if you're sticking to a certain type of brand and reputation or anything like that, you want to really listen to those podcasts and see if it's something that you want to associate your brand with, because you are lending your credibility to the podcast when you are a guest on them. So you have to watch out for that. Now, when you're going on a podcast, you're going on a mission, you need to have at least a good 3 or 4 topics to talk about. If it's a movie podcast, like I'll use Sir Sturdy's Horror Time, you talk about a movie. So you already have that topic in line, and it's great because it's like, boom, I'm talking about this movie. Make sure you can relate it somewhat to some of the stuff that you've done in your life. If you can make it to your, connected to your real life, if you're, I'll use my good buddy Lloyd, who's an amazing podcaster. When he goes on podcasts, he talks about how just taking $50 to $100 a week, he was able to create $1 million investment portfolio. Hey, Adam, good evening to you. I'm glad you could check out. Thank you so much for checking out that live show I did. It was very much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed it and you got some value out of that show. Again, sometimes I don't get all the StreamYard notifications, so I apologize if you're commenting and I don't see it. It's something up with StreamYard, but we'll be working on something in the future. But yeah, you want to have those 3 or 4 topics when you're guesting, so that allows your audience, the other audience, to know that you're an expert in some stuff. So when you're going on, if you're going on a specific podcast, so if you like Lloyd, he's going on a podcast for investment and side hustle. He talks about how taking $100 of his own money every week and putting it into stocks, he was able to grow $1 million portfolio. So that's something that he can talk about on investing or, side hustle or business type podcast, because he's built, and he's also teaching people how to do it as well. So there is something that's one of his stories. He can tell stories about some of his customers and his coaching clients that he's helped grow their portfolio and their side hustle. So there's that. When I go on podcasts, I talk about podcasting. So I can talk about any type of podcast because I have a podcast that talks about podcasting. So I can talk about those interviews. I have my entrepreneur podcast, so I can talk about all the lessons I've learned from my entrepreneurs. So I get to pull on that. I have the Phil Better show, which is all about movies. So I can talk about what it's like to, have a review podcast for movies. But I also have The Real Boys. I have Stock Dirty for investments. And I have all these other podcasts, and the ones that I produce for my clients, I can talk about that. So I have everything about podcasting, so I can talk about that. What is your niche? What is your podcast on? That is what you're important on. So try and find 3 topics that relate to that, and then find podcasts that talk about that. And those 3 topics will save you, because once you know those topics and those stories that you can relate to those topics. So investing, I can talk like I do really small investing on like $5 a week is all I can afford. But I can talk about how Lloyd built his, because I'm associated with him. Like I interviewed him and learned that. So I can say, look, I haven't done it, but this guy has, and he has more proof than I do, because he has that credibility. I can talk about, Dom Einhorn buying a rugby team and what the process is of like that. I can talk to Mick Manhattan, the creator of the Scene Snob Network, about, he has a big charity event that I'm going to be part of this Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to be doing a live show of Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur podcast. So you guys can see that, and I'm going to interview an entrepreneur live on the air. So that's something you can see. I've never done a live entrepreneur interview, so it's going to be interesting. But you have these stories that you can share, and you want to have those because that's going to make you relatable to the audience. And the stories really don't always have to make sense, because there's a magic phrase that apparently erases most people's memories. You can tell a story about nothing. Pretty much, I can tell a story about me driving my car to work when you're answering a question, and then you just follow it up. The reason I told you that was because that phrase will just erase everything in the past, because no one's going to return back and listen to the whole story. If it's a 10-minute story, no one's listening to that. Okay, everybody wants the cliff notes. Everybody doesn't have time. So you can tell this great story and you go, the reason I told you this story was because it points out how small wins over time will lead to the capturing the mountain. Like the reason I told you about Lloyd and the $100 a month is because that's how he built $1 million portfolio. He invested his money, $100, into a stock, into stocks, and boom, boom. And he just kept getting money and reinvesting. So that teaches you patience, teaches you how, small wins here are time. Because, $100 every week for 60 weeks, 60 years, until, like, if you start now until you're 60, you put $100 every week, $400 a month, you'll have over $1 million in that portfolio by the time you're 60. And it's probably generating an extra $30,000 in dividends if you have it in dividend stocks, probably. And then boom, you have passive income that you can live off of. So, like, these stories, and like the reason I told you that was because this is something you can learn by listening to Lloyd's podcast, or this is something you can do to create passive income for yourself. Like, that phrase can erase everything. So you can either tell something that's true, and you also let them know this was the reason I told you. This is the moral of the story, in essence. So they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. And it just helps you. Like, that is one of the most beneficial things, like rationalizing your story to your audience when you're on a podcast or someone else's podcast. It just makes you more of an authority, because you're summarizing. You're like, here's the story, here's the summary. I'm giving you both. This is how well I know my stuff and how well I can answer questions. So it makes you seem wise. When you're leaving the episode, this is something more at the end, have one or two dedicated places so that they can find you. So if you're going on to talk and you have a podcast or a business, you share one of those links. You like, for me, I'm more of a podcaster. I want to develop my podcast. I want people to listen to my podcast. So when I go on there, I go, if you want to listen to my podcast, where I talk with entrepreneurs and learn their story, and you can learn from there, you go to investingyourselfpod.com. So that's investingyourselfpod.com, and you can listen to their show, subscribe, and it's going to be great for you. If you want to follow me and learn more about podcasting and increase your knowledge, make sure you go onto Instagram and you follow me at Podcaster Phil Better. Those are the two links I always shout out. I don't tell you where you can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, anywhere else, because on my profile on Instagram is a tree link, which is just someone clicks and they can get all the links to everything they need to find me, and they can follow me on their own time. When someone's listening to a podcast, they're doing something else. They're working out, they're riding their bike, they're driving, they are walking, they are, working, and it's background noise just to laugh and learn. So they don't have time to go to remember all these things. You want to make it concise and easy for people to remember. Brand everything under one brand if you can. Like, if you go Invest in Yourself Pod or Invest Pod, that's pretty much all the Invest in Yourself podcast. But go to the website, investingyourselfpod.com, and it will link to all those things. So when you have a time, you can go there. You can find the Instagram, you can find the Twitter, you can find the Facebook, you can find the the Patreon and everything else that's there. So you have that option. But also, if you want to find me on Instagram, at Podcaster Phil Better. So people remember that. And of course, I branded myself as a podcaster. I'm Podcaster Phil Better. Like, that sticks in people's minds. So you want to make easy things to remember, to link to. You don't give out everything, because people won't remember, and then people won't bother. Give them two simple things for people to remember, and they will 100% follow you. I've seen an increase in my social media by doing that, and downloads by just being a guest and sharing those two things. I've been doing it for months, and you'll see it too. So that's something you need to remember when you're doing that. And if you're a business owner, provide a discount code and a simple landing page on their website. So if you're a business and you're going to business or whatever, I've seen people do it. One of my previous guests on Invest in Yourself Pod, they said, visit my website /investpod or Phil Better, I believe. And it's a dedicated landing page for my guests, for my audience to go and visit and learn. So you can get free stuff or discounted stuff. So offer that as well if you're running a business and podcasting when you're guesting. That's something you need to remember, because it will increase your sales. Like, because there is a potential, like, you give them 15% off, that's still, $85 that someone could be spending if you sell something for $100, and $15 off is $85. You're still making $85. Whether you had made that or not, you still have that chance, and That just increases your authority, and it shows how much you care. And then later on, you can see whether it's worthwhile. Like this podcast got me, 15 sales. Is it worthwhile paying them, $25 to $100 to sponsor an episode or sponsor their podcast or get an ad space on their podcast? Because you can see the value of having your brand there on the podcast. So that's an option you can look at. And they get into your funnel. Remember, if they have a dedicated landing page, they can get into your email list. Another way to grow your email list, them going straight to have the email list, own the domain of your podcast, have it redirect to the SendFox. There's a previous episode where we set up the email list, have it land to your smart page. They sign up to the newsletter, and then it redirects to your website hosting page. Right there, look at that. You're growing your email list, you're growing your subscribers for your podcast, helping your Google ranking with your podcast and getting the SEO, all that by just doing something simple as having a simple website that you share on podcasts. So that's something you need to think about as well. Look, you give me so much. And also, ask your podcast. At the end of the episode, after you've done everything, you thanked everybody, you go, okay, when are you going live? Ask, are you going to send me the links? If they send you the links, great. Have those links. Spread it on social media. Say, hey, I was on this podcast. Give it a listen here. We talked about this. Add your own copy. If they tag you in it, share the post, because that will eventually, someone else is going to listen to that episode in your audience. Maybe they'll like that podcast, and that's going to grow that podcast. And so those podcasters will be happy because they're like, oh my God, he helped bring us 50 more likes because this guy, he shared it, and they're indebted to you now, and now you can ask them for a small favor, which leads to pretty much the next tip here that I love doing. It's asking if they can get you on other podcasts. Simple as that. All podcasters have connections to other podcasters. So if you're a guest on one podcast, go, hey, I really had a fun time. You shared those links. You can go, do you know anybody who would want me on their podcast or would enjoy me? And they'll be like, yeah, let me reach out to this so and so. And now you're on to like four or five other podcasts with larger audiences or potentially larger audiences that you can share your story, your message, your brand with, and that increases your relevance. That increases your authority in your domain. So let's look at Sir Sturdy, who's an amazing podcaster who has a great podcast called Horror with Sir Sturdy. It's a horror podcast. When I go on his podcast as a guest, I am going as Phil Better for the Phil Better Show, another movie podcast, because I know his audience are interested in movies. I mentioned the fact that I have a wrestling podcast. I mentioned that I have a podcast that teaches you how to grow up. Podcast, just start from scratch and grow it. But I also have a podcast that, talks with entrepreneurs so that you can learn to be an entrepreneur. I share all those, but I say I'm here for the Phil Better Show because I'm reviewing movies just like that show I host with my buddy Aaron Talks Film, the pop culture expert. That goes live on Saturdays at 5:30 Eastern Standard Time. So that's what I do. I share that. You go there and you're that person. You share that knowledge there, and it just creates an authority-ness in your figure, in your industry. Like Sir Sturdy, he's an authority in horror. He has this amazing horror podcast. He's had directors of horror movies. He's doing contests. There's so much. He has his own merchandise. When are you coming back? Listen, if I'm always doing your podcast, I don't have time for other people's podcast. Some love. Thank you so much for the love. Whoever you are, I'll check later and I'll say thanks to you. If you want to leave a comment and so everybody and Facebook can see it, you need to click OK. There's a little link at the top of the exclamation of comments. Just click on that. Give StreamYard some the OK to post your name so that I can see it. But I sent you love as well. I love receiving love. But yeah, you want to be an authority like Sir Sturdy. He's an authority in horror podcasts. He has this amazing podcast group. Hey, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So you just ask anyways. And whenever I'm free, I have a free time. I'm always available to be on your show. I'm just a little busy from time to time because of podcasting, being a mogul and all that, and the new client I signed. But yeah, so taking Sir Sturdy, he has all this authority, and he keeps getting these great guests on. When he goes on other podcasts, other horror podcasts, he can go as the horror expert because he's done so many episodes. He's watched so many horror movies, and he's had so many great guests on in the horror world and industry, like actual actors, directors, producers, all this amazing stuff. So he's now this authority because he has this expertise, and then he can share when he goes on other guests. So it builds your expertise, and also he can always ask, hey, do you know any other horror podcasters? Like, yeah, he jumps over to them, he jumps over to others, and grows, and he grows his network because you invite them back to your podcast. Invite similar podcasters onto your podcast, because then you get a second crack at their audience. That's the big money question. Like, I have Sir Sturdy on my podcast, The Phil Better Show. We did horror, and I'm going to have him again in October because he's a horror man. I love having experts in the horror world on my podcast. So that's what it is. On this podcast, I'm interviewing actual podcasters, so you can hear the struggles of beginners, intermediate and long-term podcasters, so that you can learn from them. This is what this podcast is for. This is just to learn and how to maximize being a podcaster for your business or just for your brand, if you want to be just a solo podcaster like I'm doing right now. The final thing I'm going to talk about, this is going to be a short, probably 25-minute episode, is offer to find guests for them. Like my podcast, Investing Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast, I have a lot of entrepreneurs. I have over 100 entrepreneurs that I've invested in my time, and they've invested their time in the episode. So it's great. But I know they want to be on other podcasts. Ooh, let's see here. Here we go. I'd even say have people on your podcast who are interested in your content, if it is the same or not, as long as they know what they're talking about. Yeah, as long as they're an expert in their field. If they're interested, like I know I interviewed a financial security advisor who loved movies, and I'm like, maybe I'll have him on my podcast, the Phil Better Show, to discuss his favorite movie, because he knows his stuff, and maybe we'll touch a bit about his business in the background. But that's an option too you can have if you want. Yes. Here we go. People agreeing. It's 100. There we go. But yeah, you just need to remember, like, be a guest when you're having people on as a guest. Treat them kindly. Treat them awesome. When you're a guest on it, it's like you're a guest at someone's house. Be kind. Be courteous. But also say, hey, I know other podcasters who would be interested to be on your podcast. So when I go on business podcasts, I go, I have a lot of entrepreneurs. Do you want access to them? Like my buddy Chris Coden from the Talking with Expert podcast, my network is open to him because he's talking to experts, and I interview entrepreneurs who are experts. So might as well connect the two, because it can benefit both. It's different audiences, because Chris has an audience of experts, I have an audience of entrepreneurs, but the guests can be similar. They can cross over because they're experts. If I'm getting them there, they have to be experts, but experts in entrepreneurship in their domain. That's why they're an entrepreneur in their domain. So I move them over to Chris, and Chris asks them more expertise about what it is that they do. So you build podcasts like that, and you build those connections, and those nice podcasters will love you. When you connect a podcaster with an amazing guest, there's an opportunity for the podcaster's podcast to explode, can go viral. And that's all we want. As a podcaster, that's all we want. So we're looking for those guests that will help us go viral. I know my buddy, the book doctor himself, Dr. Jeremy's son, who's an amazing podcaster, he just booked like 40 interviews for himself. Like 40 interviews, that's a lot. But it's getting his name out there and getting the chance to find his ideal client that will sign with him. So he's putting in 40 hours. There's a chance that it's going to present a client to him. You work 40 hours anyways for a day job. Why not do 40 hours of podcasting that will live forever and potentially generate revenue for you? That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the show. It was a quick one because I was doing guests. We've had 2 guests on, and they did excellent. They told you very simply where they can find them, as well as sharing my expertise as being a guest. I want to thank you all for tuning in, sharing the love, commenting all the time. Remember, if you're watching live, #live. I always love seeing that. If you're watching the replay, #replay. If you're listening to this as a podcast episode or even on YouTube, if I'm posting there, leave a comment, send me an email. Aaron, yes, I'm going to be sending you something. We were supposed to have you last Friday. If we can do it. There we go. Hashtag love it, brother. I'll talk to you off air, Aaron. Yes. Make sure you like and subscribe. Tell a friend about this. If they're looking to start a podcast, there's a podcast telling them exactly how to start a podcast and the best way about it. I love your faces. Remember to invest in yourself. I am Phil Better, the Podcast Mogul. This is Invest in Yourself, the podcast series. I wish you all the very best.